Steve Darrow. Hey, Steve, top end, Steve Darrow. Says Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution, I like it already, provides for what are commonly called the enumerated powers. The EPA, the FCC, FAA, SEC, DOT, and virtually all the alphabet agencies don't seem to fall within the enumerated powers. Are these instances of government involvement even allowable within the scope of the federal government in the first place? No, they are not allowable. They are not. This is why they all have to go. I would now we're entering the realm of practical fantasy, but now we're really entering the world of saving the country. Let's look at them again. It was a really good selection. The Environmental Protection Agency, the Federal Communications Commission, the Federal Aviation Agency, Security and Exchange Commission, and the Department of Transportation. All of these gigantic federal agencies have their fingers in something that there is no constitutional authority for. Except that there is, although not in the way that they want it. Since the Constitution, and look, I think the Constitution is divinely inspired. To this day, after doing this for 10 years now, I keep every now and then I'll run into somebody and say, "Well, I guess the Constitution kind of missed that one." It's like, no, they haven't missed any of it. It's all there. It's absolutely all there. So to answer this question in terms of is there a government place for it, the Constitution says no, there is no federal place for it. But the Constitution also says, in that magnificent, most underestimated of all of the documents in the Constitution, the 10th Amendment says that any powers not specifically granted to the federal government shall devolve to the states or to the people, which means that if you want to have an environmental protection agency for California, fantastic, march on. And most states would want something like that in 1960s and 70s when there was mercury in the rivers and the Great Lakes were completely sterile, and so when I say that they don't belong there and they need to be removed, I'm not saying that that the functions that they have to serve. It galls me to say that I'm having a hard time. I can see the EPA being a state-based organization. I can see the Security and Exchange Commission. I don't know. They didn't do a super great job in the past. Department of Transportation, there's absolutely no reason for. The FCC is becoming more and more irrelevant as more and more of our communication moves from on the air, actual broadcast signals, to the internet. So I think we could see the FCC go. I don't off the top of my cuff know how you would do the FAA on a statewide basis, but just because I haven't thought about it doesn't mean it's not easy to do. Right now, when you travel from Los Angeles to New York, you're handed off to a number of different control centers. Los Angeles Center is one, and I think Klamath Falls is the one in Utah. So there, as you fly from LA to New York, you are handed off at least 3 or 4 times, maybe more. You go to Cleveland Center, and then and you probably could find a way to manage that on a statewide basis. So maybe what I'm trying to say here is that that the FAA, as much as I hate to say it, the FAA has some functions that I don't know. Look, don't get me wrong. I'm not like, yeah, hooray FAA. I'm a private pilot with 1,000 hours. Yes, it's inconceivable. But there are some issues there that would be a little thorny. For instance, if you had every state doing its own air traffic control, not only would there be more handoffs and stuff, but what happens to a flight that just nicks a corner of a state, which would be happening all the time, So I don't know. What? Yeah, interesting. I have to think about that. But in any event, virtually all of this can go and should go. And when I say go, I don't mean disappear. I mean it should just move down. The Department of Education is a great example. we have a Department of Education, and Common Core was the attempt on the left to make sure that every single school kid in America got the same progressive indoctrination as every other kid. And they seem to have failed in that. And so when I say the Department of Education needs to go, that doesn't mean that that I think that there should be no departments of education. I just think there should be 60,000 of them. I don't know how many counties there are in the U.S. Off the top of my head, that number sounds about right. 6,000, I don't know, whatever. But yeah, why don't we, the Department of Education should be replaced by local municipal departments of education. And some of them will do things that are just boneheaded stupid, and others will do things that are really working, and there will be a way to tell which ones are working, which one isn't. And then other municipalities or whatever would be free to change that, change their curriculum. So let's say I've got the LA Unified School District, and I've got it in a sane world. There is no Department of Education anymore. And forget all the. I've just got an area of schools like the size of Los Angeles, and I've got scores on what reading comprehension are and graduation rates and how our students are doing in science and math and all the rest of it, and it's appalling. Now, if it turned out that they were doing something in Columbus, Ohio, where the graduation rate was up 20% and the comprehension scores were double, then I would say, well, whatever you guys are doing, why don't we do some of that? But all of it would be great. We did a segment on sunset laws in Idaho. Don't move to Idaho. You do not want to move to Idaho. It's a wretched place. But I'm not joking, that I think you should really sunset everything. And as I said on that Bill Whittle Now, if you didn't get a chance to see it, and if you didn't, shame on you. But if you didn't get a chance to see it, I really am serious. I think every single law in the books ought to be, on December 31st, is null and void unless it has been renewed by the legislature, including laws against murder, which I imagine would be renewed promptly. I can see where a legislative session would say, well, the first thing we got to do is we got to make sure that the murder and rape and arson laws and all those laws and the fraud laws, those things all have to be renewed. Agreed. Fantastic. I'm with you. And then as you spend more and more time, this is what I want. I want legislators to spend as much time as possible not making new laws. Anything that makes them not make new laws makes me happy. I made a compelling case that for a couple $1 billion, you could save the country by having them spend all of their time in the Cayman Islands. But anyway, yes, I agree, Steve. They need to go. And then Scott had the breathtaking clarity to say, now imagine if that was what happened to the budget process, because we don't argue about the entire discussion we have about spending is not about whether an agency is worth spending its budget on. It's all about what kind of increase will these agencies get. But what if all these agencies had to basically account for their money? What if NASA had to show why they're spending as much money now as they were when they were actually flying 4 space shuttles? What if their entire budget was up for review every year? All of it. You had to justify all of it. If it were up to me, and NASA, like I said 100 times, as a kid, and I'm so in love with NASA, I still have the NASA vector tattooed on the inside of my chest. I just loved it. But now I would say if NASA's doing $13 billion a year or whatever, what they were doing back when they were flying space shuttles, I would say cut them down to maybe 1 or 2 and make virtually all of that money go to exploration. And the rest of it is get the hell out of the way. Exploration. And maybe a little money for the kind of research that doesn't provide an immediate payoff. NASA should be doing probes to other planets, and NASA should be developing things like Vasimir thrusters and nuclear rockets and all the rest of it. That's what NASA should be. They should be a government coordination center with a very small staff, Somebody's got to run the launch pads. I'm fine with NASA administrating the launch pads at Kennedy and the rest of the place. So for use for SpaceX and Blue Horizon and all the rest of them. But yeah, I think they all need to go. And then you'd have to start asking questions like, there's really just one. Somebody asked me about this once. They said, "Well, what is the bill? Well, what if you're so set against these high taxes? What taxes do you think we should pay?" That's an interesting question. Federal taxes. It's a very interesting question, and it took me a full 20 seconds, I think, to come up with the answer to me, which is, we should pay as much tax evenly. I mean, as a percentage, everybody's paying 6% of income or whatever the number is. I think the answer is we should pay federal tax necessary to fund an accountable running of the agencies that are empowered in the Constitution. In other words, what the United States Constitution sets forth as the federal authority, we should pay taxes enough to run those organizations sufficiently. Not even necessarily frugally, but certainly not, flagrantly. So, yeah, I don't know. We'll see. I'm just going to go down the list.